Hi everyone, and welcome to another video. Today we're going to be covering the subject of dual booting Windows and Linux. I've definitely had quite a few folks, both on the YouTube channel but also on the forums, ask me in the past, how do I dual boot Windows and Linux? And so I figured, why not I just walk you through the process of setting up Windows and Linux on the same machine. Specifically around installing both Linux and Windows on the same hard drive. I do not recommend you to do it this way, but in this example, I will show you how you can get this done if you only have a single hard drive. So without further ado, let's just jump into it. So the first step that we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and install Windows. So I went ahead and I prepared the virtual machine that we're going to use for dual booting both Windows and Linux. In this case, we're going to use EndeavourOS as the Linux distro. And we're going to use Windows 10 as the Windows version that we're going to be installing in this virtual machine. So to start the process, let's begin by installing Windows 10 first. So what we're going to do now is we're going to boot into the Windows 10 operating system using the Windows 10 ISO. So at this point, we're just going to click Next, Install Now. We're going to click on I don't have a product key. If you have a product key, you can always enter it here. And for this demo, I don't have one, so I'm just going to click I don't have a product key. We're going to select Windows 10 Pro. Of course, feel free to select whichever version of Windows you feel you would need to use for your setup. We're going to accept the license agreement. We're going to click Next. I'm going to do a custom install. So I went ahead and I kind of loaded the drive. So as you can see here, I have a 120 gig drive. Now you might have a 2 terabyte drive, or you might have a 1 terabyte drive, or a 500 gig drive. The most important thing is that when you're installing Windows and you're partitioning Windows, you do not want to use up all the space. So what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and only use half of the space. So I'm going to pick about 60 gigs of capacity for Windows 10. And you're going to see that it creates 3 partitions. And then we're going to see there's an additional drive 0 with unallocated space here. And this is the space that we're going to use for Linux. But for now, we're going to install Windows on this 60 gig or 58 gig primary partition. So we're going to click on Next. And this is going to allow us to essentially install Windows. So I'm going to fast forward this part, and then as soon as we get to the Windows install, I'm going to resume. So as we can see, the OS has installed, and we're now going to go ahead and reboot into Windows. So as soon as we boot into Windows and everything looks good, we will go ahead and jump straight into the Linux install next. So at this point, we can just click yes to accept the defaults. I'm not really going to customize this setup of Windows 10 because that's not really what the video is about. I just kind of want to show you the bare minimal setup that we need to do to get dual boot to work. And in this case, I'm just going to create a simple test account with a very simple password. And then we're just going to pick random questions. We don't really care what our answers are because we're never going to be recovering this account. So this should pretty much get us to the basic setup. And once this gets done, we're pretty much good to go and ready to install Linux. So there we go. We now got Windows installed. And as you can see here, if I launch Explorer, you can kind of see my 60 gig hard disk that I created. But also, if I show you the entire disk, my bad, this is not the right app. It's disk mgmt.msc. So we're going to launch this. You're going to see that I have an actual 60 gig partition that we're going to use for Linux. Now, if you do have Windows using up all of the space, you can technically shrink your partition before you install Linux. So this is kind of like a fresh install, but if you are doing, let's say you already have Windows installed and you want to install Linux alongside it, but you don't want to reinstall Windows, if you have enough free space, you can actually shrink your partition using a partitioning tool. If you're interested in seeing how that works, please let me know and I can definitely maybe create another video to kind of show you how that works. So now that we got Windows installed, the next step would be to get Linux set up. So what I'm going to do is before we reboot, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to actually, you know what, let's do it like this. Let's shut down the VM. So I'm going to shut it down. And then what I'll do is I'm just going to remove one of the CD-ROM drives because we no longer need it. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to change this to the EndeavourOS install. So now we have our EndeavourOS install as the ISO. And then for the options, I'm just going to go back and I'm going to put the EndeavourOS ISO as the first boot device so that I can boot off of it. And then we're going to go back to our console and then we're going to start our virtual machine again. However, this time we should be presented with the EndeavourOS boot menu, and as you can see, it's here. So now when you boot into EndeavourOS, we have two options. We have the NVIDIA option. So if you have an NVIDIA GPU, you're going to go with this option here. And if you don't have an NVIDIA GPU, you just have like an AMD GPU, you're going to go with option 1, which is what I'm going to do here. So let's go ahead and boot into EndeavourOS live environment. So once you're booted into a live environment, you're going to see something like this. So this is basically the EndeavourOS live environment. And then to start the installation of EndeavourOS, we're just going to click on the Start Installer. We do have two options of installing EndeavourOS. The first option is to use the online method. So this will basically allow you to download stuff over the internet. And if you don't have an internet, for example, you'll be able to install it with the offline version, but I believe it uses the XFCE desktop environment with EndeavourOS theming. So it's really up to you how you want to do this. I'm going to go with let's just say we'll go with the offline installer because it'll just be a lot quicker. But if you do want to do it with the online installer, feel free to do so. So we're going to go with offline. And at this point, we're just going to select, English as our language, or if you have a different language, you can pick whichever language you want. You're going to click next. Same thing, pick your time zone, and then select your default language for your keyboard and keyboard layout. And then the most important thing that we have to do here is the actual partitioning. And this, we have to be careful because if we screw this up, then Windows will not work. So the way to do this would be to do manual partitioning. And you can always choose install, alongside something, which will allow you, install alongside Windows, which will allow you to basically shrink the partition. I personally like to do this myself. I like to go through the manual partitioning part, but again, it's really up to you. The way I'm going to do it right now is going to show you how to manually create the partitions. But of course, you have multiple options on how you're going to do something. So we're going to go with the manual partitioning option. We're going to click on next. You're going to see that you have 4 Windows partitions essentially here. And these partitions we cannot touch. The only thing that we can do is we can create additional partitions or additional primary partitions using the free space that we have here. So the first thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to create a new partition. And I'm going to create a partition for boot because the boot partition is really important, right? It's how you're going to boot your operating system. It has things like the initial RAM disk, the bootloader, etc., right? So it's important that we have it set up. And the mount point has to always be either boot or boot EFI. Now, the main difference between the two is if you're using EFI configuration. So within your computer, all the most recent computers have UEFI support. And UEFI support gives you some additional functionalities, such as being able to support disks that are going to be more than 2 terabytes in size, being able to have more than 4 primary partitions. So for folks that have like a 2 terabyte disk and higher, they're probably going to have an EFI configuration. And so that's why you're going to go with boot EFI. But if you had an MBR configuration, for example, here instead of being GPT, it would be MBR, then you would go with a boot option instead. You would not actually see the boot EFI option if you didn't have the EFI or UEFI configured on your computer. So I'm going to go with EFI because that's what I chose. And I'm going to basically make sure that it is also FAT32 because for the boot EFI partition, it needs to be FAT32 as a file system. And so I'm going to say OK. Oh, actually, I made a mistake here. Sorry. It's not supposed to be 62 gigs. It is only supposed to be, I'm going to give it about 1 gig. So 1024. I'm going to say OK. And now we have our boot EFI partition. Next, we're going to create a swap partition. And the reason why I create a swap partition is because the swap partition, if you don't have enough memory, the swap partition is going to allow you to essentially swap the disk. It'll give you a bit of better performance. So in order to create a swap partition, we just select, where is it? Here. Sorry, we're going to go just select Linux swap. And then we're going to say, we're going to give it about 2 times the amount of memory. So if I have 4 gigs, I'm going to give it 8 gigs of storage. So 896, let's say, around. We're going to say OK. And now we have our swap partition. And then the third partition we're going to create is our root partition. And this is going to be where we're going to install Linux. So we're going to select root. And then here we're going to pick the root. And the root is basically a /. So we're going to do it like this. And then we have the option of a file system. Now we can use extension 4, or we can use something like BetterFS. Now, I prefer to use BetterFS myself because the BetterFS file system gives you a nice snapshot functionality that I really like to use, that allows me to quickly restore my Linux install to a previous state to when I took the snapshot, and through something like time shift. And I'll talk about that at a later video. But for now, let's just go with the option of BetterFS. I'm going to click OK. We're going to leave the capacity as is because we'll just use remaining capacity. And now we have created essentially 3 partitions. We created the boot partition, the swap partition, and the BetterFS partition. This is where we're going to install Linux. So we're going to click on Next. And we're going to provide our name. So my name is Andre, and we're just going to provide our password. I'm going to click on Next. And you can kind of see here that this is what it was before, where we had a bunch of empty space. And now we created 3 partitions for Linux. EFI partition is about 1 gigs. The swap is around 8 gigs. And then our main OS is going to have about 52 gigs of space. And all we're going to do is I'm going to click on Install. And Install now. And so now what's going to happen is it's going to go through the process of basically installing everything onto the hard drive. And then when it's done, we're going to be able to reboot. And we're going to see like a grub boot menu. And it's going to give us the option to boot into either Windows or Linux. To this VM, I should be able to see a EndeavourOS grub bootloader. And it's going to give me the option of installing running both Linux and Windows. So if I were to boot into Linux, as you can see here, it is slowly going to boot into Linux, and I'm going to be able to basically use my Linux install. So there is my Linux install. And you can kind of see here, there's my XFCE with Endeavor theming Linux install. And then what I'm going to do now is let's go ahead and restart. And we're going to restart into Windows. And now let's go ahead and choose Windows. And there we have it. So if we just go ahead and sign back in, we now have Windows. So this is a perfect example of how you can install both Windows and Linux on the same machine using the same hard disk. So I hope this video was helpful. If you have any additional questions, feel free to comment. And if something wasn't very clear, of course, always feel free to ask any more questions. I hope you liked the video. And if you definitely like the video, feel free to subscribe, like, comment, and I will do my best to continue producing more content. So thank you very much and have a good day.